Your brain makes decisions 10 seconds before you're consciously aware of them. 10 full seconds. Not a blink, not a moment. 10 complete seconds. Pause on that for a second. Let it actually land. Right now, as you sit there believing you're choosing to watch this video, choosing to stay, choosing to nod your head, choosing to take your next breath, your brain already made those choices 10 seconds ago, before you showed up. And here's the part that really messes with people. Scientists can predict with nearly 70% accuracy which button you're going to press before you even know you're going to press it. So let me ask you something that doesn't have a comfortable answer. Where were you during those 10 seconds? If your brain decided before you became aware of deciding, then who or what is actually doing the choosing? And if you're not the one choosing, are you even you? This isn't abstract philosophy. This isn't a thought. Experiment. This is neuroscience, published in peer-reviewed journals, replicated across laboratories around the world. And it's about to completely rearrange everything you think you understand about consciousness, free will, and the nature of reality itself. Welcome to Observer Effect number 27. Now let me say something that's going to feel uncomfortable at first. Most people, and I mean almost everyone, move through life convinced they are the author of their thoughts, the captain of their ship. The conscious agent making deliberate decisions about what to think, what to feel, what to do next. Entire civilizations are built on this assumption. Our legal systems, our moral frameworks, the very idea of personal responsibility itself. And then the experiments happened. In the 1980s, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet ran a deceptively simple study. The instructions were basic. Move your wrist whenever you feel like it. No planning, no strategy, just spontaneous action. While participants did this, Libet measured their brain activity and asked them to report the exact moment they felt the decision to move. The results were shocking. The brain displayed something called a readiness, potential, an electrical signature of preparation, before participants reported becoming aware of their decision. Not after. Before. The sequence wasn't 1. You decide. 2. The brain prepares. 3. You act. It was 1. The brain prepares. 2. You become aware of deciding. 3. You act. Consciousness arrived late to its own event. Now, at this point, most people try to dismiss it. Okay, they say, but that's just a wrist movement. That's not a real decision. And that's where things get even more interesting. In 2008, neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes took the experiment much further. Using fMRI technology, he watched the entire brain light up in real time while people made choices. Left button or right button, no pressure, totally up to you, whenever you want, and he could see the decision forming. Up to 10 seconds before participants reported being aware of choosing, their brains were already broadcasting which button they were going to press. This is usually where panic sets in. People, here, your brain decides before you do, and immediately jump to the worst conclusion. I'm a robot. I'm a biological machine running pre-written code. Free will is an illusion. I'm not steering my life, I'm just watching it happen. And honestly, that fear makes sense. Because if you're not in control, then what's the point? Why try? Why take responsibility? Why believe your choices matter at all? But here's what almost nobody tells you about that 10-second gap. Imagine Haynes is watching your brain right now. He sees the neural patterns forming. He leans in and says, "In 10 seconds, you're going to press the left button." You hear him, and you know what you can do. You can press the right button instead. You can override it. Because the prediction isn't destiny, it's probability. The brain isn't a dictator, it's a dance partner. And here's the shift I want you to consider. What if the 10-second gap isn't where you disappear? What if it's where you emerge? Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a quantum field of possibility. Your brain, this 3-pound universe of neurons and electricity, is processing millions of inputs every second, past experiences, present sensations, anticipated futures, calculations you're never consciously aware of. And then something happens. A pattern begins to form. A wave starts to collapse. Potential narrows into probability. And that's the moment consciousness enters the scene, not to force the outcome, not to break the laws of physics, but to participate in the collapse itself, to be the awareness through which possibility becomes reality. Let me be very clear here, because this part matters. The 10-second gap doesn't prove you lack free will. It reveals something far more elegant. Your will isn't separate from your brain. Your consciousness isn't a ghost pulling levers from outside the machine. You are the machine, and the awareness of it. Brain, body, environment, experience. One unified field, and what we call you is the moment that field becomes aware of itself. Decisions don't happen in isolation. They emerge from the entire context of who you are, everything you've lived, everything you're sensing, everything you're becoming. Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do, integrating all of that into a coherent response. And consciousness? Consciousness is the moment that response becomes known to itself. You are not being controlled by your brain. You are your brain becoming aware. And now we arrive at the real question. If consciousness isn't the dictator of the process, what role does it actually play? Is it just a passive observer? A spectator watching a predetermined show? Or, and stay with me here, is observation itself an active force? This is where neuroscience collides with quantum mechanics, where the hard problem of consciousness meets the observer effect, where reality starts to feel less solid and more fluid. Because the same era that gave us brain imaging technology, the same decade that let us watch decisions form before awareness, is also when physicists began taking consciousness seriously, not as a side effect of matter, but as a fundamental feature of reality itself. Ready to go deeper? Because what comes next is where everything flips. Let's rewind for a moment back to school, back to the first time you heard about George Berkeley, the 18th century Irish bishop with the outrageous claim that nothing exists unless it's being observed. To be, he said, is to be perceived. The man who argued that if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, there isn't just no sound, there is no tree. And you probably remember what your teacher said next. There's a famous story about Samuel Johnson, the celebrated English writer. When he first heard George Berkeley's philosophy, the idea that reality only exists when it's being observed, Johnson didn't argue, he didn't debate, he didn't write a rebuttal. He walked up to a large stone, kicked it as hard as he could, felt the pain explode through his foot, and declared, "I refute him thus." Everyone laughed. I laughed. Berkeley became a joke. The philosopher, so lost in abstraction that he forgot about physical reality, so detached from common sense that a stubbed toe could demolish his entire worldview. There's even a famous limerick about it. It goes like this. There once was a man who said, God must think it exceedingly odd if he finds that this tree continues to be when there's no one about in the quad. And the reply, Dear sir, your astonishment's odd. I am always about in the quad, and that's why the tree will continue to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God. Cute, right? Berkeley's out here claiming God has to keep watching the universe or it disappears, and we're all rolling our eyes like, yeah, okay, Bishop, sure. But here's the part nobody ever told you in philosophy class. Berkeley might have been right, and I need you to really hear what comes next, because this isn't speculation. This isn't New Age mysticism. This isn't spiritual fluff or manifestation culture. This is physics, hard science, peer-reviewed, replicated. The kind of research that shows up in physical review letters, the most prestigious physics journal on the planet. And it says the same thing Berkeley said 300 years ago. Observation doesn't influence reality. It doesn't interact with reality. It creates reality. The act of observing, of measuring, of becoming aware, literally collapses a wave function from a cloud of probabilities into a single, concrete outcome. Before observation, a particle, exists in superposition, here and there, nowhere and everywhere. A smear of potential, a field of possibility. Ask where it is and the universe answers, yes. After observation, the wave collapses. The particle is here, not there. This location, this momentum, this state, and the only difference between before and after, an observer, awareness, consciousness engaging with the quantum field. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, sure, but that's just particles, tiny things. Quantum weirdness that has nothing to do with trees, stones, and the everyday world I actually live in. And for decades, physicists agreed with you. Quantum mechanics is weird, sure, but it's weird down there. At scales so small they don't affect us. Up here in the macro world of stubbed toes and falling trees, we're safe. Newton still rules. Classical physics still applies. Reality is solid, objective, and independent of whether anyone's looking at it. Except, there's a problem with that assumption, a big one, and it has a name: Bell's theorem. In 1964, John Bell, a brilliant Irish physicist, by the way, who probably would have gotten along just fine with Berkeley, published a paper that quietly detonated our understanding of reality. Bell proved mathematically that quantum mechanics cannot be completed into a local, deterministic theory unless you allow for one very specific thing: free will. Let me say that again because it's wild. The equations only work if you assume that experimenters, conscious observers, have the freedom to choose what to measure. That their choices aren't predetermined by hidden variables or locked in by past events. That at the moment of observation, there is genuine freedom in how the wave function collapses. Bell himself wrote, "Quantum mechanics cannot be made into a deterministic theory unless we give up the assumption that experimenters are free to choose what to measure." And then, in 2010, someone actually ran the numbers. They calculated how much free will you'd have to give up to explain the quantum correlations we observe. The result appeared, again, in Physical Review letters. 14%. Not all of it, not none of it. 14%. What that means in human terms? No one really knows. But here's what is clear. The words free will are now appearing in physics journals, not psychology, not philosophy, physics. The hardest of hard sciences is now wrestling with consciousness, choice, and observation. Berkeley's ridiculous idea that reality requires an observer just became a central feature of our best scientific model of how the universe works. And here's the part that should stop you cold. If observation is required to collapse quantum possibilities into classical realities, and if this process scales up, from particles to molecules, from molecules to cells, from cells to organisms, then your awareness, your consciousness, might not be a passive witness to reality. You might be an active participant in its creation. Not because you control everything, but because observation itself is a creative act. Now let's bring this back down to earth for a moment. I'm not saying you can think your way into a new car. I'm not saying you can manifest $1 million by visualizing hard enough. That's not what quantum mechanics says. And that's not what I'm saying. The universe isn't a cosmic vending machine where you insert positive thoughts and receive material rewards. But what if? And this is the question that haunts physicists and philosophers alike. What if focused, coherent observation does influence probabilities? Not with certainty, with tendency, not by forcing outcomes. By participating in the collapse of the wave, one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, Pascual Jordan, put it bluntly, observations not only disturb what is to be measured, they produce it. Produce it, not discover, not reveal. Produce. And if that's true for electrons and photons, where does it stop? At what point does reality become so large, so classical, that observation no longer matters? Some physicists say it happens quickly. Decoherence takes over. The environment itself acts as an observer. The wave collapses without any conscious involvement. But here's the truth. We don't actually know. There's a reason it's called the measurement problem, not the measurement solution. The moment you try to define exactly what counts as an observer, exactly what triggers collapse, the whole thing starts to slip through your fingers. One physicist, half joking and half serious, once wrote this: "If God's observation collapses the wave functions of large objects into reality, quantum experiments suggest that he isn't observing the small." So what does that mean? That God ignores particles? That consciousness only matters at certain scales? Or that the boundary between observer and observed is far more fluid than we ever imagined? The honest answer: we don't know. But the fact that we're even asking the question, that alone is revolutionary. And now we're ready to talk about the hard problem. Not a hard problem. The hard problem, capital T, capital H, capital P, the one philosopher David Chalmers named in the 1990s, and the one that, decades later, still has no solution. So here's the question that sits at the center of all of this. How does a 3-pound lump of wet matter, neurons firing, chemicals cascading, electricity sparking, produce the inner world of experience? How does the brain generate the feeling of what it's like to see red, to taste chocolate, to feel heartbreak, to feel joy, or even the quiet hum of simply being alive? This is what philosopher David Chalmers was pointing at when he drew a line between two kinds of questions. On one side, the questions about how the brain processes information, how it reacts to stimuli, how it integrates sensory data, how signals move, where they go, what they trigger. He called those the easy problems. And before you laugh, he didn't mean easy as in simple. He meant easy as in solvable in principle. We can imagine how to answer them. Build better scanners, map more neural pathways, track more correlations. Eventually, we'll understand the mechanisms. But the hard problem is different, because you can map every neuron, track every electrical spike, measure every chemical interaction, and you still haven't explained why there's something it's like to be you, why there's an inner observer experiencing all of this, instead of just information processing in the dark. And here's the part most people miss. This is the same problem quantum mechanics runs into. Not how does measurement work, but what is an observer? Not what collapses the wave, but what is observation? Neuroscience and physics are circling the same mystery from opposite sides, and neither one has cracked it. But here's where I want to shift your perspective. Most people hear the hard problem and think, okay, science hasn't figured it out yet. Give it time. We'll solve it eventually. But what if we're asking the wrong question? Stay with me, because this is where it gets uncomfortable before it gets liberating. What if consciousness isn't produced by the brain? What if the brain is more like a radio, tuning into consciousness, translating it, giving it shape and form, but not generating it from scratch? I know how that sounds. The instinctive reaction is, that's dualism. That's unscientific. That's spirituality pretending to be insight. And I get it. We've been trained, rigorously, to believe that the brain creates the mind, that neurons equal thoughts. That matter comes first, and experience comes later. But here's the thing. That's an assumption, not a proven fact. We've never actually demonstrated how matter becomes mind. We've shown correlations between brain states and mental states. We've shown that damaging the brain affects consciousness. But correlation isn't causation, and dependence isn't identity. Your television depends on electricity to function. Damage the circuits, and the picture distorts or disappears. But the TV doesn't create the broadcast. It receives it. So here's the question. Could the brain be doing something similar? Could consciousness be a field, something the brain tunes into, filters, and expresses as individual experience? And before you dismiss that as woo-woo nonsense, remember something important. We already accept fields in physics, electromagnetic fields, gravitational fields, the Higgs field, Fields aren't objects. They're not things floating in space. They're properties of space itself, invisible, intangible, undeniably real. So why not a consciousness field? Now, let me be clear, I'm not saying this is the answer. I'm not claiming to have solved the hard problem with a metaphor. What I'm saying is that the fact this problem refuses to go away, that it resists every attempt to reduce it to neurons and synapses, might be telling us something important. It might be telling us that consciousness isn't an emergent side effect of complexity. It might be fundamental. And this is where everything clicks into place. If consciousness is fundamental, if it isn't produced by matter but woven into the fabric of reality itself, then you're not a biological accident that somehow stumbled into awareness. You're not a fluke. You're not a ghost trapped inside a machine. You're a focal point, a node in the network, a place where the field becomes aware of itself. And that changes everything. Because if observation collapses quantum possibilities into realities, and if you are conscious, aware, an observer, then you are not separate from the creative process. You are embedded in it. You're participating in it every single moment, whether you realize it or not. Your thoughts, your emotions, your attention, your focus, your coherence. These aren't side effects, they're inputs into the field. Now let me be very precise here, because this is where most people go wrong. I'm not saying you control reality. I'm not saying you can bend the universe to your will through sheer intention. The field is vast. The variables are infinite. You're one node among billions, all collapsing waves, all shaping probabilities. But you're not powerless either. You're a co-creator, a conscious participant in an unfolding process. And the quality of your participation, the clarity, the coherence, the alignment, matters. Not because the universe rewards good thoughts and punishes bad ones. Not because karma is a cosmic accountant keeping score. But because coherent observation has a different effect on the quantum field than incoherent observation. Think of it like this. Laser and a light bulb use the same photons. One is focused, aligned, coherent. It cuts through steel. The other is scattered, diffuse, unfocused. It just lights up the room. Your consciousness can be scattered, reactive, distracted, pulled in 1,000 directions, or it can be coherent, focused, clear, aligned with intention, and that difference, that's where your power lives. Now let's bring this back to where we started. The 10-second gap. Your brain decides 10 seconds before you're aware. And I asked, what if that's not where you disappear? What if that's where you emerge? Here's what that means. In those 10 seconds, your brain is doing what it's designed to do. Processing, integrating, calculating probabilities based on your history, your patterns, your conditioning, your environment. Then, at a certain threshold, the pattern coheres. A decision crystallizes, and that's when you, awareness, step in. Not to override the process, not to fight it, but to witness it, to become conscious of it, to recognize, yes, this aligns with who I am. Or, no, this no longer serves me. That witnessing isn't passive, that is observation. And observation, as we've seen, collapses the wave. So the 10-second gap isn't proof that you're a robot. It's evidence that you're a system. Beautiful, complex quantum system where biology and consciousness dance together, where the brain offers possibilities and awareness participates in which wave collapses. Not arbitrarily, not from outside the system, but from within it, as the system becoming aware of itself. And the more coherent you are, the more aligned your thoughts, emotions, and actions, the more powerfully you participate in that collapse. This is why meditation works, why focus matters, why clarity changes outcomes. Not through magic, through quantum mechanics, through the observer effect, scaled up to the level of human consciousness. You're not controlling the universe, but you're not being controlled by it either. You're dancing with it, co-creating with it, collapsing probabilities into realities, moment by moment. Through the simple, yet profound act of being aware. And that elegant participation, that's what we've been calling free will all along. Not freedom from causation, but freedom through conscious participation in causation. So, shall we go deeper? Let me bring all of this together. We started with a crisis, the 10-second gap, the neuroscience that seems to say you're not in control, the experiments that predict your choices before you're even aware of making them. And we could have stopped there. We could have accepted the materialist conclusion. You're a biological machine. Free will is an illusion. Consciousness is an accident. Meaning is just a story you tell yourself to feel better. But we didn't stop there. We went deeper. We revisited Berkeley, the philosopher everyone mocked, and realized that quantum mechanics quietly proved him right. Observation doesn't symbolize reality. It doesn't influence reality. It creates reality, not as metaphor, but as physics. We confronted the hard problem, the question science still can't answer, and recognized that consciousness might not be produced by the brain at all. It might be a fundamental feature of reality itself. And we faced the observer effect, the measurement problem that haunts quantum mechanics, and saw something extraordinary. You, conscious you, are not separate from the creative process. You are embedded in it. So here's the synthesis, the radical truth at the center of everything we've explored. You are the observer, not in some abstract philosophical sense, but in a very real quantum mechanical sense. You are a focal point of awareness in a field of infinite possibility, and the act of your observation, your focus, your attention, your coherence, influences which possibilities collapse into your experienced reality, not with certainty, not with total control, but with influence, with participation, with creative engagement, and that 14%, that number from the physics journals, the amount of free will you'd have to give up to account for quantum correlations? Maybe that's not a loss. Maybe that's the gift. 14% is the space between pure determinism and pure randomness. It's the gap where consciousness enters, where you step in, where observation matters. It's small, but it's enough. Enough to steer, enough to choose, enough to participate. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds incredible in theory, but what does it mean for my life? How do I use this? What am I supposed to do differently? And here's where I'm going to challenge you, because the question, what should I do, is still coming from the old paradigm. It still assumes you're separate from the process, that there's a you over here and a reality over there, and your job is to figure out the right actions to manipulate outcomes. But what if it's not about doing? What if it's about being? What if the real question isn't how do I control reality, but how do I align with it? Not forcing, not pushing, not white-knuckling your way through life trying to collapse every wave in your favor, but becoming coherent, becoming clear, becoming the kind of observer whose very presence shifts the field. Here's the practice. Simple, elegant, profound. Notice when you're scattered, when your thoughts are dragging you into the past or projecting you into the future. When your emotions are reactive, chaotic, incoherent, when you're moving through life on autopilot, unconscious, disconnected, not really present, and then pause, breathe, ground. Return to the present moment, the only moment where observation actually happens, the only moment where a wave can collapse, and from that place, not from effort, not from force, but from alignment, notice what emerges. Notice which decisions crystallize, which actions feel coherent, which paths open, not because you pushed, but because you aligned. This isn't manifestation as manipulation. This is manifestation as participation, as conscious engagement with the quantum field, as being the observer, fully present, fully coherent, fully alive. And the more you practice this, the more you return to presence, to clarity, to coherence, the more you'll notice something extraordinary. Reality responds, not magically, not instantly, not in ways that violate physics, but subtly, elegantly, in synchronicities that feel like the universe winking at you. in opportunities that appear exactly when you need them, in a flow that feels less like fighting and more like dancing. Because you're not separate from the field. You are the field becoming aware of itself. And when you align, when your internal state matches the frequency of what you're calling in, the collapse happens naturally. Not because you forced it, but because coherence attracts coherence. Because focus shapes probability. Because observation, as we've seen, creates reality. You are the observer. And the observer effect isn't something that only happens in quantum labs with particles and lasers. It's happening right now. In you. Through you. As you. Every thought, every choice, every moment of awareness. You're collapsing waves. You're shaping reality. You're participating in the most profound creative process in the universe. The only question is, are you doing it consciously or unconsciously? So here's my invitation to you. If something in this video resonated, if you felt that spark of recognition, that yes, this is what I've been sensing but couldn't articulate, don't let it end here. Because this is Observer Effect number 27, and the journey we're on together. It's just getting started. Subscribe, not because I need numbers, but because you deserve a space where these questions are taken seriously, where science and spirituality aren't enemies, but partners, where the hard problems aren't dismissed, but honored. And here's what I want you to do right now in the comments. Drop one word, just one. The word that captures the energy you are feeling in this moment. Curiosity, relief, terror, freedom, alignment, whatever is true for you. Because when you name it, you're observing it. And when you observe it, you collapse the wave. You make it real. Before we close, let me tell you what's coming in episode number 28. Because if today stretched the boundaries of how you think, what comes next is going to push them even further. We're diving deeper into the hard problem. The question that has neuroscientists and philosophers at war with each other. The experiment that challenges everything you think you know about experience. And here's the real kicker. We're asking whether a machine, an artificial intelligence, could ever be conscious. Not just intelligent. Conscious. Can a computer have subjective experience? Is consciousness reducible to neurons firing? Or is there something else, something fundamental, that science hasn't accounted for yet? Two brilliant minds, two opposite answers, and implications that will change how you see reality. I'll drop the link to the full playlist and episode 28 in the description below. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. You are the observer. The field is waiting. What will you collapse today?